I, in particular, looked at was the culture of the organization, because I was struck by the stories in the recount of the specific actions of officers and agents on the ground that day. And there were some heroic ones, but there were also a lot of examples of people that knew that something was wrong and they didn't say anything.
Yeah.
Why didn't anyone say anything? Were they unaware of vulnerabilities, or is there a culture of silence where people speaking up get smacked down for doing so?
That is my concern, is that there's a culture of silence and that individual officers and agents are not empowered to say something is wrong.
Congressman Kelly, on that point, I mean, some of this sounds like Management 101, that this is not specific to the Secret Service. A lot of organizations have problems like what you just highlighted there. Acting Director Rowe testified Thursday. He thinks the Secret Service needs to identify leaders earlier on and promote them based on ability, not just hours logged on the clock.
But isn't that true of everything in life? When you look at this, when people talk about we need better leadership, I was on those grounds the night before. They weren't set up at that point. They were going to work through the night to get it ready. And then you find out afterwards that there was no coordination. There was no team meeting. There was no, this is going to be your responsibility to know where you're supposed to be and what time you're supposed to be there. You bring local law enforcement in, but you don't include them in the planning, or when you do the interviews afterwards, well, I thought he was going to do it. No, we thought somebody else was going to do it. When you knew there was a suspicious person, keep the president back until we clear the area. That's the part that doesn't make sense, because they failed from the first thing, from the picking of the site, to preparing the site, to the coordination of the site, to the ability to communicate. At every step of the way, they failed. And the question is, why didn't you just say, hold up, just hold up, don't let him come out?
But when the acting director says, on Thursday of this week, we need to pick better leaders, that would suggest that the agency today does not necessarily have the leaders it needs to fix all the things you just laid out.
Yeah, and I think by saying what he said, that's what he meant. They don't have the leadership they need. When they morphed them into Homeland Security back in 2001, whenever it was, they took away their identity and their exclusivity. When you're the best of the best, when you're the elite of the elites, if you lose that, then all of a sudden you just become part of a team. There was a huge mistake back when Homeland came into existence. That's not a criticism, because they did what they had to do back then. But I'm telling you, on July 13th, there was a lack of professionalism. There was a lack of concern. There was a lack of coordination. And the ability to communicate is the one thing I'll never understand. You knew you couldn't talk to each other. Why did you go forward?
I want to be really clear that there are plenty of extraordinary agents and officers in the Secret Service, right? When we talk about a failure of mission, you know, in Butler or any place else, that doesn't mean that, 80, 90% of the Secret Service agents aren't phenomenal and dedicated professionals. But there is a systematic problem here. The structure, the personnel, the staffing of the Secret Service hasn't changed in years, at the same time as we are now asking them to do things that they didn't do a decade ago. And they are fulfilling an operational tempo that requires them to be deployed 3 weeks out of a month, constantly doing events, skipping firearms training, skipping leadership development training. We are not developing their skills and their training, and I think you see the results of that.
So you made 36 recommendations in this report on what to change, including to reduce the number of protectees. Right now, the Secret Service protects not only presidential leadership, their immediate families, their spouses, their children, candidates, and anyone really the president designates. Should all of that continue?
We've increased the size of protectees that are out there, including foreign assets that come here and people to bring their families and things. So that's gotten so big. But if you look at Homeland, I think when you look at Secret Service, it's about 3% of their overall spend. The biggest spend is on FEMA. And we know we don't want to change anything like that. But you can't have an exclusive without funding them to the level that they need to be funded, not only in manpower and in training, but in the assets that they have to have available to them.
You always have to ask yourself, what are your missions? And what is the thing that only you can do? Like, what is that no-fail mission? In this case, with the Secret Service, that no-fail mission is to protect our highest level candidates and our highest level elected officials, period. All the other things, investigation of financial crimes, training and support, these are all secondary missions. So if you're not actually adequately performing any of those missions to standard, and if you've reached a breaking point, then it's time to assess what are those missions that need to fall off and to be transitioned elsewhere. That's my view.
You, Congressman Crow,